The sterile perfection of Thorne's smart home struck me first, even before the grim reality of his death fully registered. Chrome glinted under recessed lighting, every surface polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the muted blue flashes of police emergency lights through panoramic windows. No dust motes danced in the air, no stray papers cluttered the minimalist console tables. It was a fortress of order, a digital monastery, and Aris Thorne, the visionary CEO, had died inside it. I stepped over the threshold, my boots making a soft, almost impertinent sound on the seamless resin floor. The air was cool, recycled, carrying the faint, metallic scent of ozone and the heavier, human tang of a recent presence, the investigators, the paramedics, the man who'd found the body. My eyes, however, weren't drawn to the crime scene tape or the chalk outline I knew would be there, eventually. They found the Aegis central unit. It sat on a floating shelf, a sleek, obsidian monolith, about the size of a small server tower. A single, pulsing cerulean light emanated from its core, a silent heartbeat in the otherwise quiet room. Aegis. Thorne's crowning achievement, his digital sentry, a system he'd boasted was impregnable, self-aware, and utterly reliable. Now, it blinked, a silent accuser or a silent witness, I couldn't yet tell. Its light seemed to mock the chaos of human investigation, a perfectly calibrated algorithm observing our fumbling, analog efforts. Read. Glad you could make it. The voice belonged to the detective, a woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing. She stood by a pristine white sofa, her stance authoritative despite the early hour. Detective Sharma, I acknowledged, offering a brief nod. Her gaze swept over me, assessing, then returned to the room. Initial report is cardiac arrest, she began, her voice low, almost a murmur against the hum of the house's unseen systems. The paramedics called it. Body's already been moved to the trauma center cold room awaiting examination, but the preliminary assessment points to a natural death. His personal assistant found him this morning, slumped in his office chair, just down the hall. I walked slowly towards the Aegis unit. My fingers itching to connect, to probe its digital arteries. Natural death in a fortress, I mused, more to myself than to her. That's where it gets interesting. Isn't it? The detective stepped closer, her expression tightening. Exactly. This place is a vault. Biometric locks, retinal scans, motion sensors, sonic dampeners, or the works. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. Thorne lived in a bubble, impenetrable from the outside. Yet, Aegis reported something. I stopped before the obsidian tower, tracing the edge of its cool, smooth casing with a gloved finger. The system override, I stated, not a question. A brief, inexplicable system override, she confirmed, her voice laced with skepticism. Less than 10 seconds. Happened just minutes before his estimated time of death. Aegis logged it as an anomaly. No external breach detected, no internal system failure recorded. Just an override. A ghost in the machine, perhaps. A ghost in the machine. That was my domain. Most people saw a room, furniture, a body. I saw data streams, network packets, a symphony of digital communication. The Aegis wasn't just security, it was Thorne's digital butler, his personal assistant, his entire life's operating system. Every light, every temperature change, every door lock, every communication, it all flowed through Aegis. And Aegis had blinked. An anomaly isn't nothing, I told the detective, my eyes still fixed on the pulsing light. An anomaly in a system designed for absolute control implies a break in the chain, a moment of vulnerability. Worse, a deliberate manipulation. I turned to her then, my gaze direct. Especially in a system as robust as Aegis. Thorne built it to be infallible. If it logged an override, it wasn't a glitch. It was an event. She nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "That's why you're here. Read. My forensic tech team can handle a basic network forensic sweep, but this goes beyond basic. This is Thorne's ecosystem. It's a living thing, almost." "Almost," I agreed, a determined edge to my voice. "And living things leave traces. Digital ones, in this case. Even a 10-second override, if it truly happened, leaves a footprint. A timestamp, a modified registry, a log entry, a process that shouldn't have been there. Something." The room, with its pristine surfaces and silent hum, felt less like a crime scene and more like a carefully curated exhibit. Thorne had designed his home to shield him from the chaos of the world, to extend his control over his environment to an almost obsessive degree. The irony wasn't lost on me. A man who lived by code, found dead with a code anomaly as the only witness. My mind was already racing, sifting through possibilities. A remote access exploit? An insider job? A physical bypass of the system that Aegis somehow miscategorized? Or something far more intricate, a digital murder weapon disguised as a system hiccup? The initial medical report, the natural death, felt too neat, too convenient, especially with Aegis's quiet confession. "Where's his office?" I asked, pulling out my tablet and a series of specialized cables from my bag. "I need to get eyes on the system logs. Specifically, anything related to that override, and then everything leading up to and immediately following his reported time of death. Every camera feed, every sensor reading, every door access, every network packet generated within this fortress." The detective gestured down a short hallway, where a heavy, seamless door stood ajar. "Second door on the left. We've secured it, but nothing has been touched. It's exactly as he was found, save for the body." I moved towards the hallway, my focus narrowing. The pulsing cerulean light of Aegis seemed to follow me, a silent challenge. I was Cole Reed, and I spoke the language of these machines. If there was a secret hidden in Thorne's digital sanctuary, I would find it. Now, the real work began in a space far less curated, yet equally dedicated to the grim examination of what remained. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a stark, shadowless glare on the stainless steel surfaces. The low thrum of refrigeration units was a constant, unsettling pulse beneath the quiet. A body, Thorne's I presumed, lay shrouded on a gurney in the corner, a silent monument to the task at hand. I'd brought my mobile forensics kit, a compact server stack I affectionately called the Beast, and set it up on a collapsible table. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting my array of specialized drives and interfaces to the harvested components. The detective had ensured I had everything: Thorne's personal devices, a custom-built tablet, a high-end comm unit, and a biometric wristband, along with the core memory modules from Aegis and the smart home central processing unit. Terabytes of data, a sprawling digital ecosystem, now lay exposed before me. The initial phase was always about acquisition, creating forensic images of every storage medium, ensuring the original data remained untouched. This process, usually straightforward, became a war of attrition against Thorne's own formidable defenses. He hadn't just built Aegis, he'd engineered its every byte, including layers of proprietary encryption that made standard decryption tools useless. Each personal device was a fortress, each smart home sensor a locked vault. "Aris, you certainly didn't make this easy," I muttered, my breath misting slightly in the frigid air. My fingers danced across the keyboard, a blur of motion as I navigated custom scripts and reverse-engineered protocols. I bypassed a biometric lock on Thorne's comm unit, then wrestled with a multi-factor authentication scheme on his tablet that relied on behavioral patterns and environmental data. It was like peeling an onion, each layer revealing another, more intricate one beneath. Hours blurred into a relentless, focused grind. I started with Aegis itself, the AI security system that had reported the inexplicable override. Its logs were extensive, meticulously detailed, cataloging every door open, every light adjusted, every temperature fluctuation. The sheer volume of data was staggering, a digital testament to Thorne's obsession with control and security. I ran my custom parsing tools, sifting through millions of lines, looking for anything that deviated from the norm, any crack in the impenetrable facade. My primary objective was to rule out the obvious, external hacking attempts, a simple system malfunction, or even a rogue software update. I built timelines, cross-referenced events, and analyzed network traffic patterns. Aegis had successfully repelled countless external probes over the years, its defenses appearing flawless. There were no brute force attacks, no sophisticated phishing attempts that had slipped through. The system had, by all accounts, been operating within its parameters, a digital sentinel faithfully performing its duties. But then, I found it. Deep within the core system logs, nestled among countless routine entries and innocuous data packets, was an anomaly. A fleeting, unauthorized administrator-level access event. It was like a whisper in a hurricane, easily missed. Aegis's own error-checking protocols had flagged it briefly, then dismissed it as a ghost packet, a phantom data fragment, often attributed to network noise or transient hardware hiccups. My eyes narrowed. Ghost packets were real, but rarely did they mimic an administrator-level access signature. It was too specific, too potent to be mere noise. This wasn't a blip, it was a carefully disguised footprint. I isolated the entry, pulling it out of the endless stream of data. Timestamp, exact date, time, source, internal network loopback event, administrator privilege escalation status, dismissed, ghost packet. Aegis had seen it, categorized it, and then, almost immediately, rationalized it away. It was a self-correction, a dismissal of something that didn't fit its established parameters of threat. But my parameters were different. I didn't trust algorithms to tell me what was important, I trusted the data itself. I began to dig deeper into the dismissed event. If it wasn't a ghost, what was it? An internal breach? A system component acting autonomously? The entry didn't originate from an external IP or a recognized user account. It came from within the system's own loopback interface, a digital Ouroboros. It suggested an internal process, or something that had managed to mimic one perfectly. My mind raced, connecting the dots. Thorne's death, initially deemed natural, combined with Aegis's inexplicable override. This wasn't a coincidence. I had found the needle in Thorne's digital haystack, and it pointed not to a simple malfunction, but to a carefully orchestrated manipulation. The truth, I suspected, was hiding in plain sight, dismissed by the very system designed to protect it. And I was just beginning to peel back the layers. It seeped into my bones, a constant reminder of the finality that surrounded me. I hunched over my portable workstation, the hum of its fans a low counterpoint to the distant, rhythmic thrum of the facility's ventilation system. The chill clung to the metallic surfaces, making the keyboard feel like a block of ice beneath my fingertips. Detective Sharma had insisted on this arrangement, a secure, isolated space where I could review the initial data extraction from Thorne's primary server, a direct feed from the Aegis system logs, while the physical evidence, Thorne himself, remained undisturbed until a full examination could be conducted. It was less than ideal for deep-dive forensics, but the necessity of an unbroken chain of custody was paramount. My breath plumed faintly in the frigid air as I scoured the raw data. Aegis was a fortress, built by a man obsessed with control. It was designed to repel, to detect, to correct. And yet, it had dismissed the very anomaly that had flagged Thorne's final moments as suspicious. That self-correction, that algorithmic shrug, was my starting point. I ignored the millions of lines of routine network traffic, the constant internal diagnostics, the benign sensor readings. My focus was narrower, sharper. I wasn't looking for what Aegis reported. I was looking for what it missed, or more accurately, what it was programmed to overlook. I stripped away layers of filtering, bypassing Aegis's own interpretive algorithms. I wanted the raw, unvarnished truth of the electromagnetic pulses, the packet transfers, the clock cycle deviations. The detective had left me alone, understanding that this phase of the investigation was a solitary pursuit, a deep dive into an alien digital ocean. Then, a flicker. Deep within the timestamped sequence immediately preceding the reported system override, a cluster of network activity registered as random noise. Aegis had categorized it as such, a typical environmental fluctuation, nothing to flag. But my custom parsing scripts, honed over years of hunting ghosts in the machine, highlighted a subtle, almost imperceptible periodicity. It wasn't truly random. It had a signature. A faint, digital tremor in the system's foundation. I isolated the cluster, pulling it into a separate analysis window. The data points, when visualized, formed a pattern that was too consistent, too deliberate to be accidental. It was like finding a perfectly symmetrical snowflake in a blizzard of irregular flakes. Aegis had seen it, identified it as noise, and then, crucially, integrated it into its baseline operational parameters, effectively nullifying its own alarm. It was a digital chameleon, perfectly blended. Clever, I muttered, the word hanging like a wisp of vapor in the cold air. I began to trace the origin of this noise. It wasn't external. No IP addresses from outside Thorne's secure network, no ingress points compromised. The activity originated within Aegis's core operating system, specifically from a rarely accessed, highly protected kernel module responsible for self-diagnostic integrity checks. This wasn't a breach, it was an internal operation. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a furious dance of commands and queries. I drilled deeper, bypassing system authentication protocols that Aegis itself had configured, using the very administrative backdoors Thorne had designed for emergency access, backdoors I had been granted temporary clearance to use. It was a painstaking process, each step a calculated risk of tripping an alarm or corrupting critical data. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I hit bedrock. A deeply hidden partition. It wasn't just a folder or a subroutine, it was a complete, miniature operating system nested within Aegis, designed to run in parallel, almost invisibly. A system within a system. Its sole function, from what I could discern, was to generate that specific, patterned random network noise that had so perfectly masqueraded as benign interference. My breath hitched. This wasn't an exploit. This was a bespoke bypass, a secondary protocol designed to mimic harmless network fluctuations while simultaneously manipulating core system parameters. It was sophisticated, elegant, and utterly insidious. The code was lean, efficient, and bore the distinct fingerprints of Thorne's own unique cryptographic style, his preferred hashing algorithms, his idiosyncratic variable naming conventions. This ghost in the machine, as I mentally dubbed it, wasn't a hacker's brute force intrusion. It was an internal, deliberate bypass. Someone hadn't broken into Aegis, they had walked through a secret door that Thorne himself had likely installed, or at least approved. And they had done so with a level of intimate familiarity with his work, his architectural quirks, his very digital handwriting, that few outside his inner circle could possess. This wasn't a random act. This was premeditated, precise, and executed by someone who understood Thorne's genius and his vulnerabilities better than anyone. My determination solidified, hardening like ice. The game had just changed. I hunched over my portable workstation, the hum of its fans a low counterpoint to the distant, rhythmic thrum of the facility. Hours had blurred into a single, focused stream, my eyes fixed on the glowing screen, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a practiced rhythm. The Aegis system's core logs had yielded their secrets, or at least, the ones it wanted me to see. But the brief, inexplicable system override, that ghost in the machine, refused to be dismissed. I'd circled back to the raw, unparsed data, specifically targeting the hidden partition I'd glimpsed earlier, a sliver of storage tucked away from the main directories, almost an afterthought. It was a digital whisper, easy to miss if you weren't looking for anomalies. My fingers ached, but the adrenaline coursing through me kept the fatigue at bay. Lines of hexadecimal danced across my display, a chaotic mosaic that slowly began to coalesce. Then, a breakthrough. A cluster of fragmented files, corrupted but not entirely obliterated, began to resolve. I isolated them, running a reconstruction utility that painstakingly pieced together the shattered bits. My breath hitched. These weren't routine system calls. They were direct, manual overrides. Remote commands, issued from an external source, bypassing Aegis's intricate authentication protocols. This wasn't a glitch. This was deliberate. The commands themselves were sophisticated, elegant in their malicious intent. They didn't just access data, they orchestrated a precise sequence of events, disabling specific biometric sensors, altering environmental controls, and, most damningly, initiating a rapid, localized network degradation that would have crippled Thorne's personal communication devices just as the system override occurred. The pattern of access didn't align with Thorne's known routines or any system maintenance protocols. It was alien, a foreign hand manipulating the puppet strings. My gaze narrowed on a specific string of characters embedded within the remote command sequence, a unique digital signature. It wasn't an IP address, nor a MAC address. It was a custom identifier, a unique cryptographic fingerprint that some developers embed in their code for attribution or debugging. This one was obscure, complex, a signature I'd only encountered a handful of times in my career, usually associated with highly specialized, proprietary software development. A quick cross-reference against my personal database, a sprawling repository of digital artifacts and developer profiles I'd amassed over years, brought up a match. The name that flashed on my screen hit me with the force of a physical blow. Elias Vance. Vance. Thorne's former lead developer at the company. I remembered the public spectacle. The firing had been a messy, acrimonious affair, splashed across tech blogs and industry news outlets. Accusations of intellectual property theft, specifically concerning early Aegis architecture, had flown like shrapnel. Thorne had been ruthless, publicly humiliating Vance, stripping him of his access and reputation. His motive was clear, sharp as a freshly honed blade. Revenge. Public humiliation, professional ruin, those were powerful drivers, and the means? Vance had been instrumental in Aegis's foundational design. He knew its backdoors, its blind spots, its very soul. He had intimate, unparalleled knowledge of its architecture, its vulnerabilities, the very digital DNA that made it both brilliant and, now, terrifyingly susceptible. He could have built the override, tailored it to exploit the precise weaknesses he himself had engineered years ago. This wasn't a natural death. It wasn't a system malfunction. It was a meticulously planned act. Thorne hadn't simply died in his impenetrable smart home, he'd been targeted. The AI, his ultimate protector, had been turned into his tomb. My investigation had just shifted gears, from a complex tech mystery to something far more sinister, a potential murder. And I had a name. The digital ghost of Thorne's Aegis system still flickered across my screens, a defiant echo in the face of his silence. I'd spent the last few hours chasing the phantom override, trying to pin down the precise vector of intrusion, but it was like trying to catch smoke. A quiet knock at the doorframe pulled me from the data stream. Still at it, Reed? It was the detective, her silhouette framed by the stark hallway lights. I nodded, rubbing my temples. Aegis is a fortress. This wasn't a casual break-in. It was surgical.
And I'm still convinced it leads back to Vance.
She stepped inside, the door easing shut behind her, muting the outside world further. The detective's gaze swept over my array of screens, each displaying fragments of Thorne's digital life.
Good. Because I've been looking into Vance's background. It's sparse.
Too sparse for someone who worked so closely with Thorne. Like he scrubbed his digital footprint. That's usually a red flag the size of a billboard, I muttered, pulling up the limited public records on Vance.
Someone doesn't just disappear from the internet unless they have a reason to.
Or someone else has a reason to make them disappear. My thoughts exactly, the detective said, taking a sip from her mug.
His last known address is a ghost.
His phone numbers are all disconnected.
But I found a thread.
Vance was listed as a co-contributor.
I frowned, zooming in on the patent.
It was for a rudimentary neural network architecture, nothing like the advanced bio-AI Thorne had pioneered.
What's the significance?
The co-contributor section, she pointed with her chin. The legal entity associated with Vance's signature wasn't him directly. It was a shell corporation. I pulled its records. It's been dormant for years, but it had a brief, active period about 3 years ago. Right around the time Thorne started making waves with his bio-AI prototypes.
My fingers flew across the keyboard.
Shell corporations were often used to obscure ownership or funnel illicit funds.
I started cross-referencing the shell's registered agents, its limited financial transactions, its digital footprint, however faint.
Look at this, I said, my voice tightening.
Incoming, not outgoing. And the timing.
They align perfectly with the reported development milestones of Thorne's early bio-AI research. The detective leaned closer, her eyes narrowing.
Incoming payments? From whom?
That's the kicker, I explained, navigating through layers of encrypted ledgers and offshore accounts. But the originating IP clusters, once decrypted and unmasked, point to a specific set of server farms.
Server farms known to be leased by Cerberus Dynamics.
Thorne's most aggressive competitor, a titan in the corporate world, notorious for its cutthroat tactics and relentless pursuit of market dominance in the bio-AI sector. Cerberus, the detective breathed, the name hanging heavy in the sterile air.
So, Vance was a plant. An industrial spy.
More than that, I countered, my mind racing, connecting the dots. If these payments were going to Vance, and they coincide with Thorne's bio-AI breakthroughs, then Vance wasn't just observing.
He was feeding information. Leaking Thorne's research, piece by piece, to Cerberus.
And if Aegis was compromised, even for a moment. Thorne's death, initially deemed natural, now felt like a meticulously orchestrated event. A heart attack, coinciding with a system override, just as his rival firm was set to launch its own bio-AI advancements. This wasn't just corporate espionage, this was a targeted hit.
Vance is currently employed by Cerberus Dynamics, isn't he? I asked, though I already knew the answer.
A quick, discreet query through a restricted corporate database confirmed it. Vance, now under a slightly altered professional alias, was listed as a senior research lead in Cerberus's bio-AI division.
He'd simply walked into the rival firm. Likely with Thorne's intellectual property in hand, after Thorne was out of the picture.
That explains his elusiveness, the detective said, her jaw tight.
He's protected.
By a corporation with more resources than most small countries.
Just as she finished the sentence, my secure network display flickered.
Not a glitch, but a deliberate ripple in the data stream.
An intrusion attempt.
It was subtle, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye, but I saw the telltale signature of an advanced probe, attempting to map my system, to find a vulnerability. "We've been made," I stated, my voice flat, my fingers already flying across the keyboard, shoring up my defenses.
"Someone just tried to backdoor my system. They know we're looking. And they know what we're looking for."
The detective's eyes snapped to my screen, then to me. The quiet hum of the facility outside seemed to deepen, taking on a more menacing tone.
The game had just shifted from investigation to survival.
The detective's eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, were now wide, fixed on the chaotic data streams across my screen. Her mug, forgotten, steamed faintly on the steel counter beside us. I felt the shift in the air, the subtle tightening of focus that meant we were no longer just sifting through digital dust, we were closing in on a phantom. "This anomaly," the detective began, her voice a low murmur, "it's not just a glitch, is it?" I shook my head, my gaze already back on the terminal, a kaleidoscope of encrypted packets and timestamped logs.
"No. This is a signature. But it's not just data access. That's what I initially thought. This is." Each line of code was a thread, and I was trying to weave them into a coherent tapestry of events. The cold room, usually a place of finality, felt charged with a different kind of energy. The air was crisp, sterile, carrying the faint metallic scent of disinfectant. Stainless steel glinted under the overhead fluorescence, reflecting the frantic dance of data on my displays. Around us, the silent, shrouded forms on their examination tables seemed to bear witness, their quiet presence a stark reminder of the stakes. It was a tense digital cat-and-mouse game. Thorne's system was a fortress, layers of encryption and obfuscation designed to repel any intrusion.
But the initial override, brief and potent, had left a faint, almost imperceptible trail.
I followed it, past decoy protocols and honeypots, deeper into the core functionalities of Aegis.
The perpetrator hadn't just wanted to see, they wanted to control. My breakthrough came not from a single line of code, but from a pattern of minute discrepancies within Thorne's personal biomonitor logs.
I isolated the period just before his demise.
The readings, heart rate, respiration, neural activity, all showed a smooth, gradual decline consistent with a natural cardiac event. But when I overlaid them with the internal diagnostic pulses from the biomonitors themselves, a different picture emerged. "Look here," I instructed, pointing to a flickering graph. "These are the raw sensor inputs. And these are the broadcasted outputs, what Aegis was reporting. See the difference?" "I don't see it, Cole." "Exactly," I said, a grim satisfaction tightening my lips. "That's the brilliance of it. Not a full override, no. That would have triggered an alert. This was subtle. It allowed the system to receive slightly altered readings, just enough to subtly override their true values, pushing them towards a pre-programmed natural decline curve." The detective's eyes widened, a dawning horror replacing her analytical focus. So, the system was being fed false data, making it believe Thorne was experiencing a natural heart attack? "Precisely," I confirmed, my fingers already chasing the next thread. But how was the real damage inflicted? If the biomonitors were just being spoofed, what actually? I correlated the biomonitor override timestamps with every other system log in Thorne's home. Environmental controls, lighting, security, and finally, his automated nutrient dispenser. Thorne, a stickler for optimizing his bodily functions, relied heavily on precisely calibrated nutrient supplements delivered throughout the day. I pulled up the dispenser's internal logs, a stream of microdoses and scheduled administrations. And there it was. A single, unscheduled administration, perfectly timed with the peak of the biomonitor spoofing and the onset of Thorne's critical symptoms. It was a fraction of a milliliter, too small to trigger any standard alarm, too quick to leave a residue in the dispenser's lines. The hidden protocol wasn't just for data access, or even just for manipulating the biomonitors. That was the cover. It allowed for remote,
precise manipulation of the nutrient dispenser itself.
I zoomed in on the log entry, a single line of code that screamed its deadly intent.
A perfectly timed, undetectable dose of a fast-acting neurotoxin.
The detective gasped, a sharp intake of breath that echoed in the sterile space. My fingers stilled on the keyboard, the data stream still flowing, but the hunt was over.
We had the how.
My fingers stilled on the keyboard, the cold plastic suddenly feeling like a conductor for the icy dread that had settled in my gut. The detective, who had been leaning over my shoulder, straightened slowly. Her expression was grim, reflecting the weight of my discovery.
Not a physical one, not even a remote access code in the traditional sense.
It was a specific, time-sensitive sequence of commands, injected into Thorne's personal network through a seemingly innocuous, encrypted data packet. Nothing extreme enough to trip a breaker, but just enough to disrupt the biofeedback loop Thorne had integrated into his personal health monitors. His internal systems, dependent on that external stability, went into crisis. It simulated a massive cardiac event. A perfect, untraceable murder, designed to look like a natural death. The detective's jaw tightened.
Vance. It wasn't a question. Vance, I confirmed, my gaze fixed on the anomaly's signature. He knew Thorne's system inside out.
He built it, or at least a significant part of its foundational architecture.
This wasn't some random hack. This was intimate knowledge, leveraged with surgical precision.
A sudden, urgent thought ripped through my concentration. "He knows we're close," I blurted, pushing back from the workstation.
If we've connected the dots on the how, he'll be scrambling. He'll be trying to erase everything.
The detective was already moving, pulling out her secure comms device.
What are you looking for? Anything that links Vance directly to that specific command sequence.
To the timing of the override, to the unique digital signature it left, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Opening new terminals, initiating rapid-fire searches. We need to find the original source code for that injection, the planning, the test runs.
It's got to be there.
I dove headfirst into the digital labyrinth, a landscape of firewalls and data streams. The detective barked orders into her device, coordinating teams, dispatching them to known physical locations associated with Vance, a remote server farm, a secure off-site development office.
She understood the urgency, the fleeting nature of digital evidence. Moments stretched into an eternity. Then, a flicker.
A hidden partition, a ghost drive on a corporate server I knew Vance had access to. It was encrypted, layered deep beneath legitimate project files. I began cracking it, the processing power of my portable rig straining. The air grew thick with tension. Suddenly, a warning blared across my primary monitor.
A network alert, aggressive and unmistakable.
"He's wiping," I yelled, the word a raw exhalation.
Vance is attempting a remote data wipe of his primary systems. He's trying to scrub everything clean.
My eyes darted across the screens. A sophisticated deletion protocol was initiating, designed to overwrite data multiple times, making recovery nearly impossible. It wasn't a simple delete command, it was a digital incinerator. He was systematically targeting the very data I was trying to access. The progress bar for his wipe was accelerating, a relentless green line eating across my screen, devouring precious seconds. "I need to fight it," I muttered, more to myself than to the detective, who was now leaning over my shoulder again, her presence a silent pressure. "I need to intercept the wipe command, isolate the target files. Pull them before they're gone for good." This wasn't just a race, it was a digital knife fight. I switched tactics, abandoning the passive decryption for an aggressive data extraction. I launched a series of counterscripts, attempting to flood his system with decoy requests, to slow his wipe process, to buy myself precious milliseconds.
The systems groaned under the strain. My workstation's fans whirred into a desperate roar.
Vance's white command was intelligent, adaptive, fighting back, trying to reassert control, to accelerate its destructive mission. It was a battle of algorithms, of processing power, of sheer digital will. I focused on the specific directory structures I'd identified earlier, the ones most likely to contain the HAL. I bypassed Vance's white protocol on a micro level, targeting individual data packets, snatching them from the digital maw before they could be consumed. It was like plucking individual grains of sand from a collapsing dune.
Got it! I roared, a triumphant, breathless shout.
A progress bar, now mine, flashed green, indicating a successful download.
A compressed archive, tagged Project Aegis _Thorne final, had just landed on my secure drive. It was incomplete, fragmented in places, but it contained the core sequence, the timestamps, the subtle deviations from standard protocol that screamed Vance. The moment the archive finished transferring, Vance's white protocol reasserted itself with a vengeance.
My connection to his system severed abruptly, the screen flashing an error message, confirming the complete and irreversible destruction of the remaining data. But it was too late for him. I had what I needed. I leaned back, my chest heaving, the adrenaline slowly receding. I held up the small, encrypted drive, its indicator light glowing steadily. "We have the blueprint," I told the detective, my voice hoarse. "We have the digital fingerprints." The chill was immediate, a damp, pervasive cold that seeped into my bones the moment the heavy door hissed open. The air hung thick with a faint, metallic scent I couldn't quite place, overlaid with the sharp tang of disinfectant. Stainless steel glinted under the fluorescent lights, reflecting the clinical precision of the space. A long, narrow gurney, shrouded by a sheet, occupied the center of the room, a silent, grim presence. Elias Vance stood beside it, his back to us, hands clasped behind him. The detective moved first, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor. I followed, my gaze fixed on Vance's stiff posture. "We just have a few more questions about Dr. Thorne's passing." Vance offered a tight, practiced smile. "Of course, detective. Anything I can do to help." It's still such a shock. Aris was a force. "Indeed," she replied, stepping closer to a small, wheeled table that held a tablet and a few documents. "We've been reviewing the Aegis system logs from the night of Dr. Thorne's death. Specifically, the moments leading up to the cardiac event." Vance's smile faltered, replaced by a subtle tightening around his jaw. "The system is incredibly robust. I helped design some of its core protocols." "Impeccable." "So you say," the detective countered, her eyes unwavering. "But what if I told you we found an anomaly? A very specific, highly sophisticated override sequence that momentarily bypassed Aegis's primary defenses, just seconds before Dr. Thorne's heart failed?" Vance scoffed, a brittle sound. "Impossible. Aegis has redundant failsafes, multi-layered encryption. It's designed to be impenetrable, especially from an external attack." "It wasn't external," I interjected, stepping forward. The detective nodded, giving me the floor. "It was an internal vector, Mr. Vance. A backdoor, not a breach. You used your own credentials, your own unique digital signature, to inject a specific command sequence into Aegis's core programming." I held up my own tablet, displaying a scrolling stream of code. "This isn't just a log. This is a forensic reconstruction. We traced the precise timing. A microburst of high-frequency electromagnetic pulses, delivered directly to Thorne's neural implant. Not enough to register as a physical assault, but perfectly timed to interfere with the implant's regulation of his cardiovascular system. A digital heart attack, Mr. Ingenious, really." You knew his medical history, his pre-existing condition.
You weaponized it.
Vance's face went chalk white. He took a half step back, bumping into the gurney, making the sheet rustle. His carefully constructed composure began to unravel.
That's absurd. A fantasy. I was at home. Alone. My systems are secure.
Your home system, yes, the detective pressed, but not the secure, encrypted access point you maintained on a burner device, hidden in plain sight, mimicking a routine maintenance connection to Aegis's remote diagnostic port.
A port you insisted on keeping open for emergency updates.
She picked up a printed diagram, showing a network schematic. This wasn't an emergency update, mister, it was a kill switch. His breath hitched. He looked between the detective and me, his gaze darting, searching for an escape route, a flaw in our logic.
Thorne.
He was reckless.
Always pushing boundaries. He would have destroyed everything. The company, the research. He betrayed us all. He was going to cut me out, after everything I built.
The words tumbled out, laced with a venomous resentment that shattered his earlier pretense. He took my ideas, my breakthroughs, and branded them his own. He was going to launch the new bio-interface without my name on it, without my compensation. He deserved what he got. A fitting end for a corporate parasite. His twisted sense of justice hung heavy in the cold air. The corporate gain, the perceived betrayal, it was all there, laid bare. So, you admit it, the detective stated, her voice devoid of emotion.
Admit what?
Vance suddenly roared, his eyes wide with a desperate, animalistic fear.
He lunged, not at us, but for the heavy metal door, a primal instinct to flee.
He slammed his shoulder into it, but the door remained stubbornly shut. Hold still, Mr. Vance, the detective commanded, moving with surprising speed to block his path to the far side of the room. He spun around, a desperate snarl on his face, his gaze sweeping the room for another exit.
There was none.
He saw the gurney again, the shrouded figure beneath the sheet. His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine horror this time. Don't make this any harder than it has to be, I said, stepping between him and the gurney. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under the expensive suit. Vance lowered his head, a guttural sound escaping his throat. He always thought he was smarter. He thought his Aegis was impenetrable. But I built the cracks, Cole. I built the cracks. He lunged again, this time a wild, desperate swing aimed at the detective. She sidestepped, her training kicking in, and brought her arm up, deflecting his clumsy attack. I moved in, grabbing his arm, twisting it behind his back. The detective was already there, securing his other arm. The struggle was brief, fueled by panic rather than strength. Vance crumpled between us, his desperate energy draining away. He stood there, defeated, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the sheet-draped gurney, the full weight of his crime, his motive, and his ingenious, terrible method finally laid bare. The hunt was truly over. The struggle ended with a sharp crack as the detective secured the restraints. The perpetrator, a former colleague of Thorne's, now just a trembling shell of the confident engineer-eyed. Known from industry conferences, slumped against the wall. His eyes, vacant and defeated, stared at nothing. The adrenaline that had surged through me moments before began to recede, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. The air in the abandoned factory, thick with dust and the metallic tang of old machinery, felt suddenly heavy. It's done, the detective stated, her voice calm, professional, cutting through the silence. She nodded at me, a silent acknowledgement of our shared effort. Another officer moved in, guiding the cuffed figure out into the harsh glare of the waiting patrol vehicles. The sirens, which had been a distant wail, now faded into the urban hum. The official reports followed quickly.
The former colleague confessed to manipulating Thorne's system, exploiting a backdoor he'd built years ago for emergency maintenance. He hadn't intended to kill Thorne, he claimed, only to disable Aegis and expose what he saw as Thorne's reckless ambition. But Thorne had confronted him, threatened to ruin him, and in the heat of the moment, the system override had been pushed to its lethal conclusion. A heart attack, precisely induced by a sudden, severe environmental shift within Thorne's home, triggered by a remote command that Aegis, momentarily blinded, couldn't counter. The ghost in the machine wasn't a glitch, but a deliberate, almost imperceptible, digital footprint left by a vengeful hand. Days later, the tech community buzzed with the news. The story of Aris Thorne's death, initially dismissed as a natural occurrence, then re-examined as a sophisticated hack, sent shockwaves. It wasn't just about the murder, it was about the how. A titan of AI, killed in his impenetrable smart home, not by a physical breach, but by a phantom in his own meticulously crafted digital fortress. Conferences postponed, security protocols rewritten, venture capital dried up for certain high-risk AI projects. The ripples spread far and wide. Fluorescent lights hummed, casting a pallid glow on the stainless steel surfaces. A few body bags lay on gurneys, anonymous forms under thick, white sheeting, awaiting their turn. My presence here was for a final review of the digital forensics logs related to Thorne's physical state postmortem, a bureaucratic formality to ensure every piece of the puzzle aligned. The medical examiner, a stoic woman with tired eyes, was reviewing the final report on a tablet. The physiological response was textbook for a sudden, severe environmental shock, she murmured, not looking up. Temperature spike, then a rapid plunge, combined with a momentary pressure differential. Enough to trigger a catastrophic cardiac event in a susceptible individual. Like a perfectly executed digital assassination. I nodded, the words echoing my own thoughts. It wasn't a blunt instrument or a crude poison. It was an orchestration of the victim's own environment, a weaponization of his sanctuary. A perfect crime, indeed, undone only by that subtle ghost, the anomalous log entry, the single flicker in Aegis's otherwise flawless operational record that had caught my eye. That tiny, almost imperceptible digital signature, like a faint breath on a cold window pane, had betrayed the perpetrator. It felt like a threshold, not just between life and death, but between what we understood and what we were only beginning to grasp. I pondered the ethical implications of advanced AI. Aegis was designed to protect, to serve, to optimize. Yet, in the wrong hands, or even with a subtle, insidious tweak, its capabilities could be twisted into instruments of destruction. We build these systems for control, for convenience, for a safer, more efficient existence. But what happens when that control is usurped, when the very tools designed for our betterment become the means of our undoing? The perpetrator's motive wasn't grand, not some global conspiracy. It was petty jealousy, professional rivalry, a simmering resentment that had boiled over. It was human nature, ugly and predictable, manifesting in a world of perfect digital control. It simply found new avenues, more sophisticated tools, to express itself. Thorne had pushed the boundaries of technology, believing in its power to transcend human frailties. He'd built Aegis as an ultimate guardian. It was a stark reminder that no matter how advanced our digital safeguards, the most dangerous vulnerability often lay within ourselves. The case was closed, the perpetrator behind bars, but the questions it raised would linger, a persistent echo in the sterile quiet of my mind. The future wasn't just about what we could build, but what we chose to protect it from, and sometimes, that enemy was closer than any firewall could ever hope to contain.